Ever wondered what secrets are hidden in one of the world's most infamous ghost towns? From mutant dogs to contaminated milk? Here are the 12 strangest things ever found in Chernobyl. Number 12. The Community of Survivors. The Chernobyl disaster is the most tragic nuclear incident in the world. On April 27, 1986, 45,000 residents were displaced. The following month, 116,000 more were displaced from their homes. Of these people, about 1,000 returned unofficially and chose to remain within the contamination zone. After all, it is in the human spirit to persevere, and so Sluty was built. This city was for the survivors of the Chernobyl disaster in 1988, just 2 years after the meltdown. It was built 31 miles from Chernobyl. It became the last city built by the Soviet Union, and today it is the youngest city in Ukraine. Architects from 8 Soviet republics came together and gave their own ideas, and each built a district inspired by their own cities. There is a district, Vilas, a district of Ria, and even a district of Icy. Before the city was established, a 6.5-foot layer of uncontaminated soil was laid down to ensure that the city was safe from radiation. In this place, no building is higher than 5 stories, and lush pine forests dot its streets. It was initially imagined to be a paradise, a refuge. In fact, this city once had the highest birth rate in Ukraine. However, its peak was short-lived. If you venture into the city today, you will see its central plaza, wide open in the center, a place that was meant to house a research center. But with the collapse of the Soviet Union, it never materialized. At the turn of the century, in 2000, the city faced an economic crisis. Its residents launched project after project in the hope that the next one would revitalize the city. However, the city that was originally meant to be a paradise did not work out exactly as planned. Today, the city continues to fight for its future with the hope that better days are coming. Number 11. Radiation-eating fungi. Humans are not the only creatures that persevere in difficult times. Nature continues to persist despite the atrocities committed by mankind. This astonishing discovery further proves this. In 2007, just 21 years after the nuclear disaster, Chernobyl was still virtually devoid of life. It was in the midst of a highly radioactive environment that scientists discovered several strains of fungi that fed on radiation. Somehow, these organisms survived and thrived in a highly radioactive environment, right in the ruins of the reactor. The secret of this organism is in melanin, the same pigment that gives our skin its color. Researchers discovered that these fungi use their melanin to absorb gamma radiation and convert it into energy, a process known as radiosynthesis, something like photosynthesis, but instead of sunlight, they use deadly radiation. This adaptation allows the fungi to not only survive, but grow faster in radioactive areas. In fact, researchers discovered that these fungi gravitated towards the most radioactive spots within the Chernobyl exclusion zone, and with this, scientists hope that these fungi will help us. NASA has been studying them, thinking that one day they could protect astronauts from cosmic radiation during long space missions or even in future colonies on Mars. In 2018, a small sample of the fungi was sent to the International Space Station, and the results were promising. They act as a self-replicating natural radiation shield for space travelers. And although research into these radioactive fungi that feed on them is still in its infancy, it gives us hope that one day nature around the exclusion zone will retain its past vitality. Number 10. The mutant dogs of Chernobyl. Nearly 4 decades after the Chernobyl disaster, a group of survivors is now thriving in its wake: mutant canines. The Chernobyl dogs somehow managed to survive and continue living in one of the most radioactive environments on Earth. To do that, they needed to adapt. Scientists discovered that these dogs are now genetically distinct from other dog populations. But how did it happen? When the Chernobyl reactor exploded in 1986, it forced thousands of people to evacuate, leaving their pets behind, while many dogs were euthanized for fear of radioactive contamination. Some survived and formed wild populations in the exclusion zone. These dogs now live in a harsh, radioactive environment that few animals have experienced for such an extended period, giving scientists a unique opportunity to study the effects of chronic radiation exposure on a large population of mammals living near the nuclear power plant within the exclusion zone. They exhibit genetic markers that set them apart from other populations. These genetic distinctions could be due to prolonged exposure to radiation, environmental isolation, or a combination of both, while their genetic diversity is lower than that of other freely breeding dogs in Ukraine who have survived for generations in an environment no one expected them to thrive in. Scientists hope that these studies will shed light not only on how radiation affects animals, but also humans. As dogs share similar environments and diets with humans, the genetic changes in the Chernobyl dog population could help us understand the effects of prolonged radiation exposure. Now, these dogs might be called mutants, but they are still animals domesticated by man. Instead of euthanizing them, several organizations have begun spaying and neutering these dogs before vaccinating them, ensuring that they have a better chance of surviving in the isolated land of Chernobyl. Number 9. The first product after the disaster. This bottle is a delicious vodka that even the most passionate spirits experts might be hesitant to try. Atomic vodka is made with Rhine water, sourced from none other than the Chernobyl exclusion zone. Despite its association, its consumers can rest assured that it is not radioactive. What makes this vodka special is the fact that it is the first consumer product to emerge from the zone since the nuclear disaster of 1986. Now, the way this vodka was made is quite interesting. Scientists from the UK and Ukraine have taken rice that was slightly contaminated with radiation, distilled it, and created a completely safe vodka, proven through rigorous testing by experts at the University of Southampton. The vodka itself is described as being a bit like moonshine, with a flavor profile more aligned with traditional Ukrainian distillation methods. The project led by Jim Smith from the University of Portsmouth has a deeper mission. Beyond making vodka, the Chernobyl Spirit Company aims to revitalize the local economy and support communities still living near the exclusion zone. Profits from the sale of atomic weapons are being reinvested in these villages that have seen little development since the disaster, so buying the vodka helps rebuild lives in the region now is a worthy toast to the cause. Number 8. A radioactive lump of death. Deep within the wreckage of Chernobyl's reactor, lies one of the most infamous remnants of the 1986 nuclear disaster, the elephant's foot. This massive lava-like mass was formed when the reactor melted down, combining molten nuclear fuel, concrete, and other materials into a deadly mixture called corium. This combination of chemicals is lethal and has only been formed a total of 5 times in all of history. The elephant's foot, being one of the deadliest, was so radioactive that just 30 seconds of exposure would leave you dizzy, and 5 minutes could be fatal within days. Initially, the elephant's foot emitted around 10,000 Renen per hour, enough radiation to kill anyone nearby within minutes. To put that into perspective, being near it for an hour was like getting over 4.5 million chest X-rays at once. Even from a distance, this roughly person-sized mass of corium was a lethal force that required extreme caution just to photograph. Despite its horrific lethality, the elephant's foot was not composed entirely of nuclear fuel. It was a mixture of melted concrete sand and reactor materials, all fused together during the meltdown. Over time, radiation levels have decreased, but it is still dangerous. Today, researchers study the corium to better understand nuclear accidents and how to prevent them. Replicas of the elephant's foot have even been created in laboratories to help scientists safely research the unique properties of this toxic material, though it is no longer as deadly as it once was. The elephant's foot remains a haunting reminder of the catastrophic power of nuclear power gone wrong. Number 7. Worms with superpowers. Scientists at the New York University have studied worms living near the Chernobyl exclusion zone, and what they have discovered is quite surprising. It turns out that deep within the Chernobyl radioactive zone, there are worms with superpowers, but not the ones you think they have. Despite living in radioactive zones with the creatures burrowing through it day in and day out, the genomes of these nematodes remain remarkably intact, meaning they are naturally resistant to radiation and where they have developed resistance over time. The rapid reproduction of these worms allows them to go through dozens of generations in a short period. It has given scientists a unique window into their evolutionary adaptations. While other animals in the area have shown signs of genetic mutations, these worms seem to have developed a remarkable ability to protect and repair their genetic material. Today, these seemingly insignificant worms have intrigued researchers who hope to learn from them about how to survive radioactivity. Number 6. Mutant wolves from Chernobyl that are immune to cancer. In addition to dogs, there were also wolves living around Chernobyl, and they too, like their domesticated relatives, have developed an extraordinary ability that helped them survive in the radioactive environment: cancer resistance. Yes, that's right. After being exposed to high levels of radiation for almost 4 decades, these wolves seem to have developed genetic mutations that protect them from developing cancer. Scientists following the wolves with GPS noticed for the first time that the animals have adapted remarkably. Researchers believe that the wolves' immune system has adapted in a way similar to that of cancer patients receiving radiation therapy. Their immune response seems to defend against DNA damage that usually leads to cancer. In other species, wolves live in an environment where radiation levels are 6 times higher than what is considered safe for humans. Despite this, they seem to thrive and do not show significant deterioration in health. Genetic analysis has revealed mutations in the DNA of wolves that could offer a form of resistance to cancer. This breakthrough could have far-reaching implications for cancer research in humans. If wolves are capable of such an adaptation, perhaps through research we can discover how humanity might achieve the same. Number 5. The sarcophagus and the largest mobile ground structure in the world. There is a sarcophagus in Chernobyl, but it is nothing like the one seen in Egypt. More than a relic left by an ancient civilization, the sarcophagus is humanity's last hope of containing a lethal mistake. The design of this structure began on May 20th, 1986, just 24 days after the disaster. However, its construction lasted 206 days, from June to the end of November of the same year. It enclosed 200 tons of radioactive lava, 30 tons of highly contaminated dust, and 16 tons of uranium and plutonium. Its construction was difficult with workers fighting against time, but its installation was arduous. Years later, the structure was in need of repair, but reinforcing it would be difficult, so the new security confinement was built. Unlike the sarcophagus, the NSC was built over 9 long years with a budget of $2 billion or $2.6 billion in today's money, with approximately 354 feet high, 531 feet long, and a width of 843. The NSE is the world's largest mobile ground structure. It was built in a clean area and slid over the reactor in 2016 using an intricate hydraulic system that moved it 60 centimeters per stroke, covering a distance of 1,072 feet during the entire operation. In around 5 days, this colossal structure will prevent radioactive dust and debris from escaping for at least the next 100 years, while also protecting the old, decaying sarcophagus built immediately after the disaster. While the arch is in place, work at Chernobyl is far from over. The next phase involves dismantling the existing sarcophagus and managing the 200 tons of radioactive waste inside Reactor 4. This project is funded by donations from over 40 countries. The world hopes that this will be enough to seal off the aftermath of the nuclear disaster. Even though the NSE will prevent further radiation leaks, it will require maintenance and continued monitoring for decades for radioactivity. Issue 4. Still contaminating cow's milk 100M from Chernobyl. Nearly 40 years after the catastrophic Chernobyl disaster, radioactive cesium continues to persist in a surprising way. Today, we still see the consequences of the disaster in cow's milk. Researchers found that cow's milk is still contaminated, even in those living more than 100 miles from the site of the explosion. Studies conducted in the Rivne region of Ukraine revealed that milk samples from local farms contain levels of radioactive cesium up to 5 times the safe limit for adults and 12 times the limit for children. Radiation levels, mainly from cesium-137, continue to build up in soil and vegetation used for domestic food and consequently pass into milk. Some settlements in this region report contamination levels of up to 500 pints of beer per litre, above the safety limits imposed by the Becker government per litre for adults and just 40 for children. This poses significant health risks, especially for children, who are the main consumers of local milk. Long-term exposure to radioactive elements such as cesium can affect almost all parts of the world, particularly increasing the risk of cancer and other serious diseases. While the government has taken some steps to mitigate the risks, these measures have not been implemented consistently. Without further action, scientists have warned that contamination levels in milk will remain dangerously high until at least 2040. Number 3. An unexpected otter. Despite persistent contamination, life has been thriving in Chernobyl. Take, for example, this unexpected resident, an otter. The otter, normally seen in healthy aquatic environments, is a particularly hopeful sight, as it suggests that waterways within the zone have regenerated to a state that can support life. While radiation levels remain concerning in parts of the zone, much of the contamination has subsided over the decades, allowing species to return in significant numbers, and this otter happily feeds on fish in waters near the exclusion zone. Scientists hope that one day Chernobyl will return to the thriving ecosystem it once was. Number 2. Chernobyl with 10,000 tourists a year. April 26th marks the anniversary of the explosion, and in 2015, 29 years after the tragedy, Chernobyl saw a surge in tourists with traffic of 10,000 a year. The exclusion zone is an 80-square-mile area that includes the abandoned town of Pryatt. Visitors can see residential buildings overtaken by nature, a desolate amusement park with its iconic Ferris wheel, and even wildlife that has flourished without human activity. Visitors from all over the world come to Chernobyl, most of whom are tourists. Dark tourism, also known as thanatourism, involves traveling to places historically associated with death and tragedy. Of course, traveling to places like this requires respect. Visitors who have seen museums marked with death are not automatically people who like morbid tourism. As of 2014, countless articles have been dedicated to discussing this matter with travel critics, including P.J. Orr, who called his 1988 trip to Warsaw, Managua, and Belfast on vacation hell. Today, there are many subcategories surrounding dark tourism, but the most important thing about this is that visiting places like Chernobyl or Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park in Japan should demand the utmost respect due to recent incidents. However, Chernobyl is now littered with landmines and other possibly dangerous explosives, putting a stop to dark tourism in the area. Number 1. Chernobyl Shadow, the secret Soviet radar. Deep inside Chernobyl there is a woodpecker, but it is not what you think. It is the Duga radar, also known as the Russian woodpecker. It is a structure that rises more than 490 feet high and stretches more than 2290 feet long. This colossal, over-the-horizon radar system is a remnant of the Soviet Union's ambition. This giant structure was built to detect intercontinental ballistic missiles from more than 1 billion feet away. It was a shadow that watched for possible attacks. Now, why is this structure so close to Chernobyl? It's simple. It needed the power of the nuclear plant. Such a colossal structure required a lot of energy, and much of it was supplied by the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. When this radar was still in operation, its size was so imposing that it became famous for disrupting and interfering with radio communications around the world. The radar transmissions were a repetitive tapping sound that earned it the nickname Russian woodpecker. Radio amateurs around the world were baffled by the strange noise that interfered with signals from Europe to North America, despite numerous conspiracy theories about its purpose. It was eventually revealed to be part of the Soviet Union's missile defense system. The Duga radar was active from 1976 until the late 1980s, shortly after the Chernobyl disaster, when the site was abandoned. Today, the radar is a haunting remnant of the Chernobyl exclusion zone, only visited by dark tourists in recent decades. We've reached the end of this video. Tell us your opinion in the comments box. If you liked the video, give it a like, subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell so you don't miss future videos like this one. See you next time.